Hi, my name is Michael Dell. I'm a Ganawage Rono living with special needs. When I was interviewed, I had an idea for a show for people from Ganawage living with disabilities. Today is the start of that show, Walk in My World. Often, people with disabilities lead sheltered lives, and their interactions are limited to caregivers and family members. I hope this show will bring you awareness of these people, their families, their lives, and their dreams for the future. Welcome back to another episode of Walk in My World. I hope everybody had a good holiday season. Today we are going to tackle the topic of FASD. With me today on Walk in My World, I have Stephanie Horn and Brian Williams from KSCS. Welcome, guys, and thank you for joining us on Walk in My World.
Thank you for having us.
Maybe you can explain in simple terms what a FASD is.
I think FASD is an umbrella term that describes some of the effects that can happen when a child or an individual has been exposed prenatally to alcohol during the mom's pregnancy.
So, they were exposed prenatally during the mom's pregnancy. Okay, but now, is there some kind of test to know before that their child is going to become FAS, have this, yeah?
Unfortunately, no. Due to just the development of the child, there are various stages where certain very important functions, like certain elements of the brain become cognitive, where the ears or the sight's being built, and the point. Right now there's no knowledge of exactly how much will affect the child, what quantity of alcohol or what stages, and unlike, for example, say a mother has been abusing some sort of substance such as cocaine, methamphetamine, there's a possibility for trace amounts of that to be in the system when a child is born, but alcohol does not really stay in the system the same way. So when a child is delivered, sometimes they can physically look completely healthy, but there will be brain effects due to the alcohol exposure.
And I think one of the things is what they call is the invisible disability, Mike. And one of the reasons why is, unlike yourself being in a wheelchair, people automatically see that you have a physical disability, but a child who has fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or an adult, because there's adults that are living with the disorder as well, they don't see those apparent salient things right away. So they expect the child to behave very normally and to be able to do things that a child developmentally at that age should be able to do, but they're not able to do it because, like we say, depending on what time the mother drinks during her pregnancy, what is affected most is the brain and the central nervous system. Because as you can see, and I brought some diagrams for you, Mike, is that throughout the pregnancy, it's the central nervous system and the brain through the entire 9 months of the fetal development that is developed. So that's the part that gets affected the most. And one of the things that we talk about, how does this affect them in school? How does this affect them in their relationships, etc.? And at KSCS, what we've done and why it's really nice to be here today with you is to let everyone know that we have so much information there and that people can come and they can access our resources. Brian is one of our new workers that just started recently, 2 days ago, who can give out these resources. And when we talk about, this is Diane Melvin, who came up with this beautiful diagram, and she works out of Portland, Oregon, and she holds an MSW, and she's also raised a daughter.
What's MSW?
A Master in Social Work. And she raised a daughter who has FASD. And she talks about, if you look at this brain, it's a very normal brain development. It's very complex. It has rich neural networks. So in terms of being able to store things, memory, think of math, okay, multiplication tables, comprehension, being able to read a story and then being able to say, you just read that story. What was the story about? And in a normal brain, you can go back in, retrieve it, and then bring it back out and say, oh, the story was about a young boy, and he was building a canoe with his grandfather, etc. In a brain, in a child whose brain has been exposed to alcohol prenatally, you don't get those rich neural networks and connections, okay? So you get something that looks like this, Mike. See, it's very disconnected. Sometimes it works because it'll work this day, and they could talk about on and off days. So one day, multiplication tables are rich and strong. It's working real good.
Yeah.
But the next day, something happens to trip it because you don't have these beautiful connections. So those are some of the cognitive deficits that do occur as a result of being prenatally exposed.
I just want to add one more thing, is you were asking earlier about testing. For a child or an adult with FASD, because of also the nature of the impairment, sometimes they get labeled with different things. Just it tends to be called like the alphabet soup. Well, they'll get called for like hypertension, or not hypertension, ADD, or other varying diseases can have some of the similar. They have some of the similar impairments.
Yeah.
So in order to actually get a full assessment to say yes, you have FASD, it actually takes a very large team to go through. They have to do a lot of series of tests. And one of the biggest thing is to find out whether or not the child was exposed prenatally to alcohol. So the actual diagnosis for FASD can take quite some time. Mm-hmm. And that's if you're an adult or a child who's living with it at the moment. You can have it, you can live with it, and it might still fly under the radar.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things, as Brian and I discussed this, in terms of getting a diagnosis, we do have some expertise within our community through the Catter Memorial Health Center Hospital here. We have Dr. Saylor, who's our pediatrician, as well. He's the one that would be the starting point if any family would like to consult for a diagnosis. But like Brian said, it is a process, and I think that would be the best place to go.
To begin.
To begin, yeah.
I know I was watching the video you provided me, and it was this family, the husband and wife could not conceive a child because of the man's specific problems that he had. So they adopted a child with FASD, but the wife was saying that she found it extremely difficult because when they got that child, when it was two sisters that had FASD. One was very high functioning, and one was had deficits, meaning in her learning style. And the mother said that she found with that one, she had to continuously repeat things that she had already shown her when she arrived. And with the other one, it was like she didn't have to do very much. She just had to do very low maintenance with the other one. Can you go and explain a bit more about that?
Certainly.
Yeah.
As again, it's just the exposure of alcohol will cause different development issues. For some people who have been exposed to alcohol when they are born, they will be almost like anyone else, and there'll be very little to almost no impairment where you notice. Other people who are severely affected, they end up needing they need more repetition. They need more structure. They can't handle things being changed or different, and as well as they have a little bit of issue with cause and effect. They can understand something's happening, but they can't understand why that's happening, and they can't make the connections for effect. And
I think one of the things, Michael, that is really critical in terms of helping out families, and I think that's the role that KSCS has been preparing and prepping. Should we have more and more individuals diagnosed with FASD in the community? Currently, we don't have any hard statistics. If there is a concrete diagnosis of FASD, but one of the important things is, in families, what you need to do in terms of support, what do we need to provide for them? One, we need to provide for them the information that they need to know in order to provide the structure, the supports for their children. And what does that mean? It means that the environments need to be changed in order to support that child continually. You need to have what they call the 8 magic keys, which is a lot of keeping the glue together, okay? And if when you look at those videos, like the ones that we do have, information videos, a lot of the parents will talk about it. These children, unlike other children who can go unsupervised at a certain age, they cannot be unsupervised. They need constant supervision. They need to have a lot of routines in place. They need to have supports and structures. So what does that mean? They need to communicate that to the whoever is going to be educating these children, as well as if there's any social groups that they're involved with. For example, in our community, things like Our Gain, the youth center, the staff needs to be aware and they need to know, okay, what do I need to do differently so that this child can be successful in being part of with everybody else in the group. And there could be little tricks that you could use.
We're talking about social integration.
Yeah, exactly.
And one question that I had: what could we do as a community of Ganawage to better integrate these persons with FASD, being a child or an adult? How can the community get better prepared in general?
Okay. What I like is, based on the information that I have and some of the research that I've done, is through even the University of New Caledonia, it's called the lifespan approach. And what they do with the lifespan approach is they look at the child not just as, okay, the child is here and then, well, they go on and they move on to this new program, a new service. It's a lifespan approach in that they start to look at, okay, what are the services, what is the child going to need throughout their lifespan into adulthood. So when they're young, they may need occupational therapy, they may need speech therapy, they may need special ed learning environments. And then afterward, once they reach into high school, you're not looking at academic programming. What you're looking at is life skill type programming. And life skill programming means like learning how to budget. How do you keep a checkbook? How do you seek employment? And this is one of the things that's really, really important, and I want people to know, is that an individual living with FASD, they can be very much a part of a workforce and a workforce environment. But like everything else, like I'll go back to that child, they might need the environmental supports in order to be successful within that work environment.
The workplace has to be, or the school has to be suited for them.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, it just with anything in the community is like, in order for them to have more success in the community, it helps if the other members of the community are more informed and aware of what FASD is, of the effects, and how certain people will need more structure than others. If more community members had an understanding of that, somebody who was FASD would potentially have a better time. There's a term called the external brain, where sometimes somebody with FASD may not be always able to handle everything on their own. But if they have external supports, people who know who they are, care for them, and seek the best for them, they can help them, they can guide them, and they can always make sure that they're looked after to a degree.
This was one of the things that I talked to Brian about as well. They do have programs out west where they're employment programs, and what they do is they have a mentor to work, and almost like a coach or a shadow, but within the work environment. And it's long term. It's not just in the training phase of getting into that job. So you look at, okay, what are the strengths? And I always say that, Mike, we have to look at the strengths, right?
Yeah.
It's so easy to look at, okay, well, this is what's wrong, this is where the weaknesses are. But let's look at the strengths, and then from there we're able to define and research suitable placements and long term, not short term, it has to be. So I think even in looking at the school environments for these children is a life skill type learning into secondary school, so that they're able to, like I said, whether or not they'll live independently will depend on how much they are affected, what type of supports they have from their family of origin, or are they going to need more community and external supports? That's what needs to be looked at as well.
do you feel that, okay, do you feel that right now, the way um, the community is set up and the way KSCS is set up, if somebody was able to watch this episode of Walk in My World, and then after say, wait a minute, I know somebody in my family, but before they seen this episode, they were kind of embarrassed or ashamed. But after they seen this episode, they were able to have the courage to go and tell their family member, "Hey, watch this episode of Walk in My World," and then after I'm gonna take you to KSCS if the person wants to go, because you can't force the person. You can't force the person if they don't want to go. But if they wanted to go and they said, okay, I seen this episode of Walking My World, put me in the car, I want to go, I want to go. Do you still feel that KSCS is better, is prepared to help them make that step to seek out treatment or whatever kind of service that they want?
I think right now KSCS has always been committed to ensuring that the staff is at the level of expertise in order to deliver those frontline services. And that's something with FASD that through the years there's been ongoing training. Mm-hmm. To answer your question, I think, yes, Mike, they would be able to. It is a starting point. But in terms of a family being ready to come forth and say, okay, we're ready now to get an FASD diagnosis, mm-hmm. or to explore this further, I think there has to be some background steps that have to take place.
That's what I meant. That's what I meant.
And I think right now what we're saying is that if anyone wants, they can contact myself or they can contact Brian, mm-hmm. just to get that type of information, where if it might be something that they might want to read. And we have different types of resources. Like I like to say, we have DVDs, we have books, we have pamphlets. So depending on what type of information that individuals want, how they like to receive the information, I think that's something that we can offer as well. If someone wants to give me a call and say, hey, Stephanie, I saw this episode and I want to know a little bit more, can we meet? Sure. Yeah. I think that's something that Brian and our services have and we offer. Yeah. And if I'm not available, I'm sure that there's someone who would be more than willing to offer their information.
Because Guanajuato and KSCS, a lot of people say, well, I don't want to go there because they're in the past they've been known to just take my child away, for lack of a better term. That's a lot of people associate KSCS with just that, and it's not. That's one part of the service, unfortunately, but that's not the only service that I want the community to understand. Yeah.
As well as my understanding is, if you're not comfortable with seeking services from KSCS, you can use that as a starting point to get referrals outside of the community, so that if we have the services available, and we certainly want to do our best for you as KSCS to help the community. But you can always use that as a launching point, depending on your own personal level of comfort. But as Stephanie's saying, is if you want information first, come to us, mm-hmm. and then from there make your decisions, and we'll support you as best we can.
And you have a website, eh? Is there anything on FASD on the website?
I am not sure if they've been able to get to that part yet. I know they were looking at getting the worker to start, specifically who was working with the FASD file. But one thing I want to go back before is, in terms of the approach when you're working with the family, okay, when you say, you don't look at an individual living with FASD, you talk about in terms of a family living with FASD.
Yep.
Okay, and when you look at it as a family living with FASD, you don't isolate it around the individual needs. You look at what are some of the supports that is there. Yeah. And I know in Washington and in other parts of the country, now let me just make this clear too. The whole notion of FASD and the knowledge of it, across North America, there's still a lot of people that aren't aware of it, okay? They're aware that, now the message is getting clearer and clearer. A woman should not consume alcohol when she's pregnant, but we do know that sometimes there's messages that are unclear given by medical professionals. That's not so in Kahnawake, though. I want to clarify that. But with that, I think what we need to do is we need to look at, okay, we don't have all the answers right now because this is a newer area to explore. So when someone is going to be diagnosed or a family is going to need those supports, okay, how those supports are going to lay out, what they're going to look like, only time will tell once we have more and more individuals who would be diagnosed. The other thing is, in other parts of North America and Canada, what happens is those support groups of parents, it's made up primarily of adoptive and foster parents initially. Then you see later on birth mothers and birth parents who have their support groups. And it's never recommended that you combine the two together based on the information and knowledge that's out there. But I think within the past 10 years, there's been an explosion of information. There's more resources, but some of my favorites, and if anyone wants to go and explore on the internet, it's called FAS Stars. It's a great website. It's from the grassroots. It's families that have developed and designed this website, and it gives you a real sensitization to what FASD is.
One question that I had, I've seen somewhere on a news report, I don't remember where, but I was watching a PBS documentary on FASD, not recently, a couple of years ago, and they gave the whole breakdown as you're doing here, but they mentioned that people with FASD have more problem with the law.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very important to talk about, yeah.
Yeah, I recall that statistically a lot of people, a large number of individuals in the Canadian prison system are believed to be affected by FASD. A lot of that has to come with some of the impairments that FASD cause is poor decision making, as well as people who are affected tend to try to be. They want to be social with people, but they don't always understand clues, like the visual clues or social clues.
Yeah.
And I watched a few of those videos as well. And one of the individuals who had, he was talking about how he got into a gang, and it was just, he thought they were his friends. He didn't really understand a lot what was going on. And so he kind of just went along with things, and then he was the oldest out of the group. And when it came down to them being charged and arrested, because he was the oldest, I think he was he was 17 or 18 at the time, he ended up getting the most of the charges because he was considered the adult, the one who should have took charge and be responsible. Whereas due to the impairment of FASD, he actually had the least understanding of what was going on. Because also as well, people with FASD tend to be impulsive. They're not always able to control their emotions or control their actions. There's a couple of different reasons why they end up being predominantly in the Canadian prison system. And then on top of the fact that it's so hard to recognize, and it's so hard to diagnose sometimes unless you have a big group of people come in and study it, you will not get them the proper treatment. People will not recognize them for who they are, and that's why they kind of get lost in the system.
Yeah. And I think one of the things is Anne Streiscott. She's one of the she was one of the leading authors who wrote one of the books, and she identified primary and secondary disabilities. And I think that's the other reason why you'd want to get support so early for children who may have FASD, as because the primary disability is those cognitive delays, dysmaturity is what they call it. It's an immaturity. Like they may be 12, 13 years of age, but they act like a 6-year-old. Okay, so when they are 18, then they're acting like they're a young teenager. So they're making decisions based on that age developmentally. The other thing is that those primary disabilities can turn into secondary disabilities. What are secondary disabilities that they talk about? Greater susceptibility to alcohol and drug addictions, school dropout, trouble with the law. They cannot keep their employment. So I think those are some of the things that you need to look at as a preventative approach to FASD, and why we say, well, you know, like a lot of people say, well, what's the benefit of having a diagnosis? Okay, one guy, he's in one of the DVDs that we do have available, and he used to work in jail, in prisons, and he had an adoptive son, and he realized that his son, who was diagnosed in his teenage years, had FASD, and what he was able to do, because he was linked to the criminal justice system, was he had a house arrest for his son, because he knew that he put him in the prison, things would just get worse and he wouldn't get any better. So by having the house arrest, he was able to continue to see, he had a child, so he was able to continue having his visits with his child. He was able to continue his day employment, but during the evening he was like on probationary measures. But he was able to do this because of the diagnosis, which was in somewhat a protection for him in the criminal justice system. And I think Canada is way ahead of the game related to that. So that's a very important question, and thank you, Michael, for bringing that up. That's really good.
I know we were talking about regular disabilities before, and that it's not exactly the same, but you know, like for people that have cerebral palsy and the like, there's all kind of services outside of community, be it group homes or stuff like that. Is there any type of group home setting or independent living setting for people with FASD?
They do exist. They exist out west. We don't have any here in the east, but they're actually very good, and they're what they call it like an independent living home environment. But you always have resources and supports close by.
Is there any kind of message that you want to leave the community of Kahnawake with, being that we're coming to the end of the show?
I think I look at prevention on two levels. One is plan your pregnancies. I say that it's so important to plan pregnancies because it is preventable, okay? FASD. But the other thing is you got to look at within prevention, you have what they call the secondary prevention. If a child or a family is living with FASD, if you can start to implement supports and measures early on, you can prevent some of those long-term things such as trouble with the law, drug and alcohol addiction, and that would be considered a preventative approach as well. Thank you.
Now, if anybody's watching this interview, we're gonna put your phone numbers up at the end of the show, but maybe you just want to get them now, or the website now, so that people can go and look if they're interested, because I'm sure that you'll get a lot of interest after this show airs.
Well, the website is kcs.ca, and
Our phone number is 450-632-6880.
forget it, sorry.
And our receptionist will
Direct you
to the right place.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on Walk in My World and opening up this topic about FASD. It's a very, very educational topic, also a very serious topic, and thank you for bringing light to this topic on Walk in My World today. Well, we've come to the end of another episode of Walk in My World. If you have any comments or questions, you can email me at mike.dell@paulcom.ca. Ona.
More than 14% of all Canadians have a disability. For Aboriginal First Nations people in Canada, there are 33% of people living with disabilities. People living with disabilities are subject to exclusion, poverty, and isolation. There are higher rates of depression, suicide, violence, and abuse for people with disabilities. We know that for Aboriginal people with disabilities in Canada, all of these rates and percentages are even higher. Statistics according to Independent Living Canada.
Oh, and again. Kanya ke haga thadi adaraste kayerniga hiadu zewaderoru.